Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I'm speaking with you in April, and once again, a month has gone by with not so much activity here at the Vedic Astrology podcast. So I thought I'd share with you what has been taking my attention this month, and it has been the wonderful task of assessing our students on the Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program that is now available on teachable.com. So in January, we reinstated the certification pathway. And since then, we've had students enrolling in the program and working their way towards handing in their first assessments. And right now April's been a beautifully busy month of meeting with various students and talking about their assessments. And it's really led me to think about the importance of assessment in astrology training and how do we know what we know. So there are several things that make the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program unique. One, of course, is the natural style of Ryan Kurzak. He's an excellent teacher. He's very systematic and focused on delivering the detail that will help people build a foundation and then lay each layer on top of that foundation, starting from a very solid place, and each foundation layer adding on top of that until we have the ability to look at the chart completely in a systematic way. So these are some of the things that make the program unique. Another element that makes the program unique now on teachable.com is that it is delivered to you, if you subscribe, once every 8 days. That means you get 1 week of video lectures and then 8 days in which to absorb and contemplate, reflect on that, to take notes, to allow it to seep into your understanding. And then you receive your next week of video lectures. So it's one of those courses that you can't fast forward through and sort of do 2 or 3 videos all in a row. Each week is compartmentalized to allow students to digest the work. But one of the things that also makes the program unique is that it involves assessment. It was originally designed as an apprenticeship, meaning that the student can be monitored and can demonstrate their skills in a safe environment with an expert teacher who's going to watch their work like a master and apprentice setup and ensure that the apprentice is able to implement each of those skills and techniques as we learn them through the program. So these are some of the unique components of this program. And let's talk about why assessment really is important, because for me, it's all about knowing that you know what you know, whatever program you're studying. And we've had on this podcast, I don't know how many great teachers. So this is not about one program being better than another program. Each of these programs from the other teachers we've had, and as you know, so many other learning methodologies for astrology, many of them are going to have assessment strategies in there because there's so much value to being assessed. And it's not often as an adult that another adult takes the time to assess your work. It's something that we tend to experience in childhood, this kind of child-parent relationship, whether it's actually your parent or whether it's just that role, someone who knows more than you and is growing you and molding you and helping you learn. So as children in school and at university, we are used to having people assess our work all the time. But then once you're qualified and you're out there doing your role as an adult in a job, whatever it is that you're specialized in, after that, we just we read books, we research the things that we're interested in, we apply things ourselves, hobbies around the house, we learn to do a bit of electrical maintenance, whatever it is. But how often is it that someone with expertise takes the time to invest their attention in what you are learning what you're thinking about, and what you're applying. And this is what I think is so powerful about having assessment as part of whatever learning strategy you have for your way to learn Vedic astrology. I think assessment is a really important component. And when I was researching this episode, I came across this quote: "Tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I will understand." Now, when I was looking that up on the internet, it was attributed to Confucius, but I've seen it attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and I had a bit of a look at it. I think this is a quote that has had an evolutionary life. It's been around for a while. But perhaps that's because the quote really does share something about our experience of learning, doesn't it? I think you can probably relate to how easy it is to sit back and watch something on YouTube, or maybe you're reading a book on astrology or by an astrologer and you think, wow, that's interesting, or gosh, that makes sense. But how much of that do we actually retain to be able to go on to practice it? And then I think that's the tell me and I will forget part. And I know that one of the things that we all really enjoyed in the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program was whenever Ryan would share his screen in the video lectures and start reading a chart with us, showing us what he was looking at and how he was making the reasoning of whatever judgment, discernment he was using about a particular technique. And this is so valuable because you're seeing someone integrate the components that we've all been learning, but they're doing this in a dynamic and spontaneous way. You know, it's not a dry thing, it's an actual live demonstration. So I think we all love those lectures in the program, but it is one thing to see someone do it with a chart that they're, sharing with you. And it's another thing for you to replicate that on a novel chart, a new, different chart, without anybody watching, without your teacher there. Is it enough to see someone doing it for you to be able to do it? And I think this is where assessment is so valuable. And this is where it comes into the apprenticeship program, that we want the students to be able to demonstrate their application of the knowledge. And I think any of us who've completed any of the assessments can share with you that it's a completely different level of knowing when you have to be the one to write it or explain it or demonstrate it. It really takes you out of the armchair, sitting back and listening to the lectures, and it puts you on the front foot. In fact, you can feel quite vulnerable because you're laying out your understanding and your reasoning, and it means that the depth of your learning, the depth of your knowledge is at a much more profound level than it would be if you were only watching. So what sort of assessments do we have here on the apprenticeship program? We've got everything from quizzes to essays, lots of case studies. There are some video lectures for you to make yourself, the requirement for you to also make video lectures. There's a practical exam, and there are supervised readings. So there's a whole lot of different ways that each student on the program is being assessed through their writing, their contemplation, their answers to short questions on quizzes, their ability to present information in a lecture, in a video, and importantly, their actual astrological ability in a practical exam. So this is where the student researches a chart of an unknown person and then answers live, spontaneous questions about any aspect of that chart's life experience. So quite a rich and diverse patchwork of different assessments throughout the program. Now, what I have spent my April doing largely is looking at essays, reading and assessing essays. So I wanted to share with you some of the assessment criteria that we have for looking at each of these essays. And regardless, across the whole span of the program, there are some common things that we look for. we always look for a word limit. We're always looking at some aspect of astrological knowledge. We're always looking for grammar, effective communication in English of these ideas, and we are looking for acknowledging the sources, that the reference sources that the person has used to come up with their arguments. So let's have a look at a few more of these in detail. So starting from the top there, word limit. Word limit. Is that being a bit picky, do you think? And what the word limit is actually all about is coaching with practice in all of these essays, the ability to express one's astrological ideas succinctly. Astrology is a subject where it's easy to waffle. They say that a picture paints 1,000 words. And as astrology is a symbolic language, how can you distill all of that richness and still communicate effectively? So for this reason, we put a word limit on each of the essays. And classically, of course, there are two types of students on the program. There's one type of student who finds the word limit daunting because it's just so many words, and they're the kind of person that's direct and to the point, and how are they ever going to come up with 1,500 words? And then there's the other person, the other type of person who is never, ever going to be able to get their ideas down to 1,500 words. So we see both of these types on the program, and regardless of which category you fall into there, both of those categories have to reach the word limit. So there's a 10% grace on that, but I am looking at every essay that I receive. Word limit is one of the things that I'm interested in. And this is important as well if you think about it. For when we work with clients, we need to be able to express complex and nuanced astrological insights in an effective way. We've only got 45 minutes with that person or an hour with that person. So one of the challenges is how to speak about astrology in this effective kind of way. So that's why I'm a stickler for the word limit when I'm assessing. Next criteria is the astrological content of each of the essays. So we've got essays on the zodiac signs, we've got essays on dignity, we've got them on the prosperity and annihilation of a house, on how planets express their energies in each house, how a planet can be understood through its Shadbala, the nodal axes, those continuum from, say, the 2nd to the 8th and back to the 2nd. What is that axis really talking about? And more and more and more. So there's plenty of essays in our assessment of this program. And as well as those content-based essays, we also have case study-based essays where the student picks a well-known person and describes the application of a technique as a way to understand the person's chart and their life experience. So this is another area of essays in the program, is case studies of well-known people. And in the final portion of the course assessment, which we call the practicum year, this case study idea is expanded into 3 papers. Each paper is 10,000 words and explores a person's chart house by house. So you can see that there's lots of different content covered by these essays, but we're always looking to make sure that our students are exposed to all of those foundational texts and techniques that make up Vedic astrology. The next generic criteria that applies across all of the essays is grammar. So if you thought that the word limit was picky, what about grammar? The essay questions always ask the student to proofread their essays, to write in full sentences and paragraphs, and to write in English. And you could say, what has this got to do with astrology or being an astrologer? And at the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program, we're trying to create a generation of Vedic astrologers who can communicate effectively about Vedic astrology. We want them to be submitting articles and writing blog posts and speaking at conferences. Now, unfortunately, most of this is done in English, so hence that focus is on writing correctly in English. And we want to think that these essays that you hand in, they're ready to publish right now. So I always recommend to my students that they ask someone else to read over their essay. And this is easier at the beginning and harder at the end, because at the beginning, we're still in the realm of what is generically known about astrology. So hopefully a layperson can read your essay. That's ideal. That's the kind of communication we're looking for. But of course, as we get further and further into astrology, there might be something, at the Lajatadhyavashtas or the Vargas that just becomes so complex that maybe the average layperson is not going to be able to walk through the density of that material. And in this way, you can think about accessing your mentor on the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. These are existing students who are a little bit ahead of you. They're in the practicum year, and they will often mentor you for free because they're really going to enjoy as well knowing how you're going and how you're solving the problems that they've been through too. And they might be the appropriate person to read your essay. So I always think it's great to ask someone else to read the essay. If you're a native speaker, another tip I recommend is getting Word or whatever program you use to narrate your paper to you. So you can just ask it to read out loud the text. And in this way, if you're a native speaker, you're going to pick up errors as you listen to it. Your ear will naturally let you know where you've left out words or where your verbs don't agree. Whatever it is, you'll pick it up by hearing it. And then for both native and non-native speakers, I recommend using the spelling and grammar check that's in your word processing program. So make sure in that review tab, you go and have a look at spelling and grammar and just go through. I know that there are a lot of words in Sanskrit when we're speaking about Vedic astrology that come up with a red wiggle underneath them, but just go through and check all of the spelling. Make sure that you agree with the spelling you've chosen. And often these programs have grammar in them already, so they'll tell you where there are issues that you might be able to fix. So those are really easy. And then I myself, when I was writing for the program, I go and drop my essay into the free version of Grammarly. And I aim for all of my students to get 80% or above as a readability score from Grammarly. Now, the free version of Grammarly is not going to fix everything for you, but it will highlight all the phrases that it considers problematic. And then on screen in Grammarly, you can play with them and see if that will fix them or not. So as you are going through the process of getting your work ready to submit, it's not just the astrological content that we're interested in, it's the ability to express these ideas and that they are ready to be published. This is out of respect for your assessor, for your reader, that the work that you're publishing is at a standard. So this is why we take grammar seriously, because Ryan has turned many of our papers into a book, or that's in process at the moment. So you never know where your work is going to end up, and it should be ready to publish right now. That's the goal. And we want you, if you're on this program, we want you to be the kind of astrologer who's submitting work to be published. We want you to be the kind of astrologer who's writing books. And that's not just about being astrologically ready for that, but also grammatically ready, no spelling mistakes and correct punctuation, etc. That's why we ask all of our students to go to that trouble. And the other reason that the essays are important is because they ask students to demonstrate their reasoning in relation to their astrological practice. And while Vedic astrology has an intuitive component, it also has an intellectual and discerning element. And the essays help students to find their reasoning voice. And this becomes very useful when you're working with clients, because you can articulate your reasonings for making certain decisions in terms of a prediction. Now, the final generic criteria that we have for all of our essays is references. What were your sources? So each essay asks the student to correctly acknowledge their sources. And this is important, again, because although there is that intuitive component to astrology, we are actually working in a field of data and of conventions, of traditions. And where do these conventions come from? How do you know what you know? One of the very first essays asked students to analyze the rashis, that's the zodiac signs, in the context of two ancient texts, the Yavana Jataka and the Jaimini Sutras. So right from the beginning, right from what does a star sign represent, we're trying to tie it back to the original text and the kind of words that were used. And then other times in those case study essays, students are going to be making observations about a well-known person's life. So how does the student know that? Is it provable? And if so, those are the ones you want to only include the ones that are provable, and so therefore demonstrate your sources. Another essay asks students to explain the whole procedure for calculating planetary dignity, which we know, of course, that our software does that in an instant. It's invisible to us. It just puts it in a table and we can look it up anytime we want. But again, we're trying to build students and astrologers who understand the mechanics of Vedic astrology. And of course, in this essay, they're going to have to refer back to that formula that's in Brihad Parashara Horosastra. So we want to have this practice of thinking about how do we know what we know. For example, we all talk about the 10th house relates to work and career, but how do we know that? Where is that written? This is the kind of level of thought that the assessment is asking the astrologer to go to. And when you take the time to understand the frameworks, that is all the conventions and techniques, and where those frameworks have come from, like which texts, which insight came up with that technique, then you know that you stand on solid ground as an astrologer. And you also know when it is that you're working from intuition. And that's fine to work from intuition as long as you know that that's what you're doing. So this is a very important part of the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program, both in doing the work, but also in assessing the work. It's asking us to not only do we know it, but how do we know? How do we know it? Where did that come from? Now, when you hand in your assessments, they're graded in a binary way only. That is, yes, you have demonstrated your competency in this assessment, or no, you haven't demonstrated your competency yet. So all students have to pass the same standard. There's no credit, distinction, pass, etc. And we are using Google Classroom as our platform to manage the assessments. And in Google Classroom, the only way to reflect that is 100%. So all of my students get 100%. And that is how you move to the next essay or the next piece of assessment, is you finish the previous one and demonstrate 100% that you are competent in that particular topic or technique. So as you can see, the assessment on the program is rigorous. And that is why Ryan shares that it's less than 10% of those who enroll in the program end up completing it. And that is absolutely okay, because you don't have to be on the certification pathway. You can just enjoy the knowledge that is shared. All of the essays and assessments are part of the Teachable program, whether you go ahead and do them or not, so that everything's there for you if you like to learn that way. But if you want to take the time to assess whether you are implementing the learning or not, we have that available. So, and we call that the certification pathway. And it was just reinstated this January 2022. And I'm delighted to report that we currently have 25 students enrolled on the pathway. And it's been around for about 4 or 5 months. So we have 15 students who have successfully demonstrated their competence in the Rashis and Signs quiz. And this is a quiz where we ask students to explain the basic astronomy of the zodiac. We want to make sure that all of our astrologers can articulate correctly what the ecliptic is, what the the zodiac is, what the constellations are, and where those things are similar and different, where they intersect and where they're not related to each other. And this is important because when we speak to people who are skeptical about astrology, we need to be able to place it in the context of the astronomy so that we don't get tripped up by some of those star signs are not the same as zodiac signs. And so we're able to know exactly what we're speaking about as it appears from Earth. So 15 students have successfully already completed that, and 6 students have demonstrated their competency in the first Rashi and Signs essay, and 4 have been successful in the second Rashi and Signs essay. So they are progressing well, and I actually have a handful of assessments that have been submitted that I'll be doing this week. So we really got a good level of submitting of work going through the program at the moment, and that's what's keeping me busy and occupied as I've been reading all about in Rashis and Signs. In those assessments, it's all about the evolutionary journey of the zodiac. And you can see we have some essays published from previous students. So while it is a competent or not yet competent situation, that is yes or no type of assessment, those essays that are particularly confidently covering the topic can be selected to be published on Ryan's website, on the Asheville Vedic Astrology website. So I'll include some links for you here in the transcript show notes so that if you want to go and have a look at the kind of thing our students are doing, you can see it on the Asheville Vedic Astrology website. Now, when students submit their work, they pay me for the assessment by booking a one-to-one feedback session with me. And at that feedback session on Zoom, we go through the assessment and we talk about any comments that I've made in relation to the criteria. And then we discuss the astrological content of the assessment as 2 colleagues, you know, what we found interesting, why we included some things or didn't include other things, what we're currently contemplating about it. So it's just a great discussion about whatever topic or technique it was. We might discuss grammar and how to present the information more effectively. So it's a chance to, you know, experiment with that together on screen. We can look at how things could be laid out or how a sentence could be changed or how to do the references at the bottom, the footnotes and endnotes. And then usually there's also a bit of time to answer other questions as well. So we might have a general discussion about how they're finding the program and any doubts they have about a particular topic. So it's a really great opportunity to connect for me with each student to see how they're going with their learning, answer any questions, and just begin that collegiate relationship that we want to have as astrologers, where we're sharing our insights and our contemplations. One of the lovely things about being part of the apprenticeship program is that as we graduate, you know, we have an MS Teams space where we all meet once a week. We can ask questions of each other and we share a foundation, a similar foundation, having watched the same videos and done the same assessments. So in my one-to-one feedback sessions, I'm already getting the opportunity to establish that relationship of colleagues with my new and up-and-coming Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship astrologers. So how did I end up in this role? Well, way back in 2002, I received my certificate in assessment and workplace training from the Australian government as part of their national accreditation framework. So as well as a very strong tertiary education sector in Australia, there is also a parallel integrated national system of accredited training and assessment. And this system is tailored to the workplace and covers practical skills that are applicable and demonstratable. And it covers, you know, anything from like plumbing, hairdressing, car mechanics, fitness instructing, massage, library studies. It's enormous, the range of programs available in the accredited framework. And so from this, with this certificate 4, I was then able to be a workplace assessor, and I don't know how many hundreds of assessments I was able to work on in this large organization in Australia. And when one is assessing in this context, it's not about grading, it's just about demonstrating competency. So that's what that national accredited framework is, that people can demonstrate their competency in a particular skill. In my certification, some of the units covered for these qualifications were not only plan assessment activities and processes, and not only assess how to assess competence, but there was also a unit on maintaining training and assessment information. So it covered the whole systemic side of assessment as well, or of training programs that involve assessment as well. So the minute that Ryan shared his vision for putting the Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program on teachable.com, that assessment administrator in me was just clicked. I just knew that I had a role to play in this program. And so now you know what I've been doing all April. I've been assessing. It's also been a delightful month of weddings. I was so lucky to officiate 3 weddings, I think in about 8 days over the Easter week. And they were all glorious and unique and quirky, elegant, just a beautiful month of weddings as well. But you also know from this podcast now how important it is to think about your learning, and how is your learning about astrology being assessed? How are you going from that, I hear it, I see it, to I'm involved with it, as we had in that quote from the beginning, because we need to know how we know what we know, and that's all of those conventions and the ancient texts that support our work. But we also need to know that we know what we know, and that's what we get from being able to demonstrate it in assessment. And I think this is the minimum that a client can expect when they visit an astrologer, that the astrologer knows the framework of the existing knowledge in which they're working. That is, they totally understand the tradition that they're working in, and also that they have demonstrated to experts that they know how to apply that knowledge correctly. So if I was a client, that's what I would expect from my astrologer. And here at the Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program, we do that in the practicum year. So through all of these essays, people have been applying their knowledge and describing how they would use techniques. And to gain entry to this final practicum year, every student that wants to do that has to read 2 charts set by the assessor of people that they do not know. And then they need to be able to answer a series of spontaneous questions asked by the assessor live on the call. So you don't get the questions in advance. You have to research the whole chart. And just like a client would come and ask you about, when am I going to have children, and should I change jobs, and where do you think I'll be living, or whatever, this is what the assessor is going to ask you. So to gain entry to the practicum year, you have to be able to demonstrate competency on 2 charts. And that is pretty remarkable. I think that is it's a bit of a life-changing event for the astrology student, because if you can, on a random chart of someone you don't know, if you can answer those questions accurately, you kind of prove to yourself that you are doing what you've been learning to do. So that's a really great part of the assessment program. And then if you're successful in that, you gain access to the practicum year. And in that year, you undertake 42 supervised readings for which you receive payment. And that's because we want you to demonstrate your ability to work professionally as an astrologer, that you've got the business practices for communicating with clients, arranging appointments, collecting data accurately, and that you've got the channels for receiving payment. So there's all of that practical stuff. And this is what we find with assessing, especially assessing work professional skills and assessing skills in adults, that it's not just the astrology content. It is also a whole lot of other generic skills that are vital to being successful. So we're looking to assess them all here in the whole program. Now, as well as doing that, both the client and the student submit written feedback on the quality of the session. So, and the student just does 4 self-assessment reflection questions, but the client has 8 questions about the quality of the session. Everything through from the accuracy through to the way the astrologer dealt with sensitive information, and how they were at explaining their reasoning, all of those kind of things. Now, as well as all of that, as you know, during the practicum year, the student submits 3 10,000-word papers. And this means that by the end of that practicum year, they have a book ready to publish, because that's a really weighty investigation, those 3 case studies. So you exit with a book ready to publish, and then they also must produce 3 one-hour video lectures about Vedic astrology, and those will each be published on Ryan's YouTube channel, meaning that the student has a profile to launch their professional practice from. So we were talking about what's the minimum requirement that we want from our astrologers, and I was saying that you want to know that they've demonstrated to an expert what they know, and this is part of how we do that with those 42 supervised readings. So I hope that you have enjoyed learning a little bit more about how we assess our Vedic astrology apprentices here at the Asheville Vedic Astrology. I'd love to hear how you know what you know about astrology. And if you are a teacher running an astrology school at the moment, I'd love to hear from you so we could do a follow-up to this episode, like a panel with several schools, and talk about our approach to assessment. Because as you can tell, it's a little one of my favorite things to talk about, is how do we really assess the competence of someone, in this case, in Vedic astrology. So yeah, I'd love to have other teachers on here talking about that. All right, great to be with you once again, and look forward to speaking with you again in May. Bye, everyone.